Well, hello everyone. This is Al Fadi, and I want to welcome you to another fabulous video series with our dear friend, brother, and guest, and expert also, Dr. Jay Smith. If you recall, in maybe a few months ago, we released a series called In Search of a Place, and it specifically dealt with Mecca and whether the historical Mecca, at least according to the standard Islamic narrative, matches up with the findings concerning, the topography, the geography, the many other aspects, if you wish, vegetation, and so on and so forth, and archaeology as well. And I think we have proved without a shadow of a doubt that what we are dealing with today, tangible evidence, do not really match up with the standard Islamic narrative concerning Mecca, when it was founded, why it was founded, and so on and so forth. Well, today, there are, as you know, it's always the case with Dr. J and his team. Whenever they find something new, they immediately release it, and we always have the privilege of inviting Dr. J here to even share it with our own viewers. So today is no difference. We are going to continue with our discussion concerning Mecca and the fact that there are more Meccan problems. So the search continues. With that in mind, I want to welcome our dear brother, Dr. J. Dr. J, welcome back.
It's good to be back in the studio again. Listen, Al-Fadi, we've gone through the book, The Man and the Place. Those are the three things we've been looking for in what we call the historical critique. You and I have already gone through the man himself, Muhammad. We've pretty well debunked him from the 7th century, not trusting the 8th and 9th century narratives or Islamic traditions, what we call the standard Islamic narrative, S.I.N. Obviously, it's a play on words, but it's for intentionally done that because we're not the ones that came up with that nomenclature. Dr. Al-Fadi, and that interview that he did in 2020, June 8th, 2020, where he actually introduced the standard Islamic narrative into his interview, that we've jumped on that and we're running with it. And in the standard Islamic narrative, really there are three things, and these are the three things that we have been trying to unpack. The book would be the Quran, the man would be Muhammad, and the place would be Mecca. You and I have already done a series on the book. We've already done a series on the man. We're going to be coming back and doing the book again. But we want to talk about and continue this series on Mecca, the place. Mecca, the place. Mecca, the place. Because how? Why? Because Muslims have made claims about it. And what I'd like to do is go to some of the claims. So let's go and put up the slide here and let's look and see what the claims are. So what have Muslims claimed? Well, first and foremost, they would say that Mecca is the oldest and best known city in history. What do they mean by that? Is, well, that's where Adam and Eve were sent to. Remember in chapter 7 of the Quran, here they are, they're up in the Garden of Eden. As you well know, the Garden of Eden is not on earth, according to the Quran. It's somewhere up in space. That's different than what we know it, because in our Bible, in Genesis account, it's definitely on earth. Well, here in chapter 7, verse 24, they are thrown out of the garden after they eat of the fruit that they're told not to.
That's right.
And they're thrown down to earth, it says, proving that they're in space. Now, stop and think. If they are the first man and they are the first woman, you don't get a place that is earlier than them. Not a place where people are living. Am I correct? Simple as that.
That's correct.
So this is the earliest inhabitant, the earliest hamlet, the earliest town, whatever you want to call it. It's the earliest place in existence as far as humans are concerned. So that already suggests that Mecca is pretty important if it's the oldest place. When you go to chapter 21 of the Quran, you get references to Abraham living there in Mecca. He's living there. He goes into the Kaaba. He takes a large idol and he destroys all the other idols. And then the next morning, when they see all these destroyed idols there, the Meccans come and they grab him and say, "What have you done?" And he said, "Well, talk to the big idol." He's actually making fun. Talk to the big idol and he'll tell you what happened. Well, of course, they can't talk to the idol. So they throw him into a fiery pit.
Right.
Now, we know a similar story in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the Bible, but they've concluded these two stories, and we know why, because this is lifted straight out of the Mishnah of Rabbah. The Mishnah of Rabbah is an apocryphal account written in the 2nd century by Jews as a folk tale, is an entertainment for children at nighttime. So that's in chapter 21, verse 51 to 71. Abraham, what, 1900 BC? Where would you put him? Would you put him in that date?
At least between 2000 to 1800 BC, give or take.
In that time period. Right. So, and certainly in that time period, between 2000 and 1800 BC, there should be a Mecca there because Abraham is there.
That is
He's
correct.
living real close to it. He's living right. He's in a stone's or spitting distance, as we call it, from the Kaaba, that square building that all the Muslims pray toward. So certainly we have Mecca existing at the time of the very first man and woman, and Mecca certainly existing by 2000 to 1900 BC. All right.
Right.
We also know that it is a center of trade. If you look at all the traditions, they're talking about Mecca being the control of the trade. What do you think Muhammad did? Who was his wife? His wife, Khadija. Well, what was her job? Her job was she was a trader, wasn't she?
That's right. And she hired him as her business manager.
Okay,
That's
so
at least the standard Islamic narrative.
and of course, if you look at, we did this and we went through in our earlier segment the trade route theory by Montgomery Watt. Remember when we talked about and we mentioned that the trade route theory, according to him, went from the coast of India there in the east, went across the Arabian Sea down to a place called Aden, and then went up through Najran, up from to Sana, then to Najran, then to Taif, then it dipped down to get down to Mecca, and then had to dip back up again or get right up and to get back up to Yathrib, and then to Tabuk, Khaybar, and then on up to Gaza in the north. So that's the trade route theory that was introduced in the last century by Montgomery Watt, destroyed by Patricia Corona when she says, hold on a minute, just take a look at that map again and you will see. And we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that because that's going to be another segment coming in because we've now found some new material.
Yeah, and I want to add to what you're saying. I mean, for the benefit of my viewers, if you missed any of these series, what Dr. J is saying, when Adam and Eve were kicked out of heaven, Islam believes that they were actually in heaven. That's why the fall in their mind, like they fell down. And there is this, I want to call it a tradition or traditional story or a mythical story, if you wish, that they were separated. And Adam and Eve kept walking, and they reunited at a mountain near Mecca known as Mount Arafat, where they basically connected. And it's one of those rituals, by the way, during the pilgrimage. So that's why Mecca is at least important from that aspect. And then the Quran does tell you that when Abraham, if you remember from biblical story, he basically sent Hagar and Ishmael away. They ended up being in Mecca, and he went and joined them, and they built, or rebuilt, I should say, the Kaaba, if you wish, and also established the city officially. That's why he's referring to chapter 21, for instance, among many other chapters in the Quran and references. And then there is Surah Quraysh, the chapter of Quraysh that talks in the Quran about the fact that Mecca is prominent when it comes to the trade during the fall, the winter, I should say, and during the summertime as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so with all this in mind, then obviously it should be one of the best known and oldest documented places on earth. There's no reason in the world why we don't have a reference for it. There has to be a reference to it. Mm-hmm. Stands to reason it's so old, it's so ancient, it's where humankind really began. It's where Abraham, pretty important figure for both traditions, whether it's Christian, Jew, or Islamic traditions. Abraham stands sacrosanct right there because he's such a huge, well, it's the Abrahamic traditions. We name our traditions after him even. So if that is the case, why can't we find any reference to it? We're going to get into that. That's going to be a problem. But let's go on to something else. We talked about this earlier, and that is the inferences to the fact that it's the center of history. Remember, we did this. This is review for most of you. What we do know is this. First of all, now, I just want to put a little caveat here. When I'm talking about Mecca in every one of these references, the word Mecca does not exist except once, and that's in chapter 48, verse 24. The word itself does not exist. That in and of itself shows you there's a problem here.
That's right.
If it's such an important city, it's the center of history, you might say. It's the beginning of history. It's where humankind's first were inaugurated into history. Then why is it there's only one place that we can find it, and it's in chapter 48, verse 24?
Using the name Mecca.
The word itself.
And the second time, it was Becca, which you're referring to right now.
So you can see that it's considered to be the first sanctuary appointed for mankind, as in chapter 3, verse 96. That's Bakka. Now, let me ask you, you're Arabic speaking. This is your language. Bakka and Mecca, are they the same radical
Of course not.
letters? And they're not the same radical
Of course
numbers.
not. No.
So it's really two different words, isn't it?
Right. And of course, if you want to really start poking holes in this, there is a Bakka Valley way northern of Israel.
That's true. In fact, as
Yeah.
we're going to find out later, it is that valley is the last stage on the pilgrimage to Jerusalem.
That's right.
You stop and stay there overnight before you go into Jerusalem.
Right.
Paul Ellis is the one that brought that up in a number of months ago when he actually introduced that. And I said, well, that's what Mecca's all about. And it has nothing to do with Mecca. It has everything to do with Jerusalem, the Jerusalem thesis. Now, we also know that according to chapter 6, verse 92, and chapter 42, verse 7, that it's the mother of all settlements. Not the word itself, but the place where the prophet lives, the place of the prophet. It's also known, as we said already, in chapter 7, verse 24, and also chapter 21, verse 51 and 71, that it's where Adam and Eve were, where Abraham came from. According to traditions, it's where Muhammad was born. Amina, his mother. His father, Abdullah, had already died by the time he was born, and so he was born there, was brought up there, spent, well, from 570 all the way up until 622. So he was in his 50s, 52 years old before he finally left Mecca. So that's pretty important because that means he spent a good bit of it, almost all of his life down there in Mecca.
Although I want to point, the Quran never mentioned anything about his birth narrative or where he lived, at least.
No, these are all the traditions.
Exactly.
The standard Islamic narrative.
That's
We always
right.
have to remind ourselves, this is the standard Islamic narrative that
Right.
we're referring to. And one of the things we have been doing is punching holes in those standard. We're kind of finding hole after hole after hole after hole after hole.
And taking deep dives.
Deep dives, according to Yasser Qadi.
Yeah.
The standard Islamic narrative has holes in it. Take a deep dive and you're not going to be able to cover those holes as we're finding. It's where the Qibla was always pointed to, according to chapter 2. Verse 149 to 150 is where the Qibla was redirected. According to tradition, that means redirected from the farthest mosque, which they believe would be Jerusalem, down to the Masjid al-Haram, which is the forbidden mosque, which
Right.
they can, as you well know, is what you grew up with knowing it was always there. Not too far from where you lived, where you grew up, right?
Oh, not at all. I mean, less than an hour, basically.
Less than an hour. You used to drive up there and just for a lark, you used
All
to go
the time.
and do your prayers
All the
there.
time, yes.
So pretty important, according to their traditions. It had to exist according to traditions. If you look at all these reference after reference after reference after reference, again, let me just make sure you know there's no reference to the name Mecca except once. All right. Now, not only was it important historically according to the tradition, it's where vegetation was, lots of vegetation. And you can see there, as they're zipping up on it, according to the Quran and the traditions, Mecca is referred to as the place of the prophet. Now, what about this place of the prophet? Well, we do know that it's in a valley and it has a parallel valley. We see that from Ibn Hisham and Al-Bukhari, Sahih Bukhari as we know it. These talk about this place that it's referring to. It has a stream going through it, according to Al-Bukhari. It is outside is the ruins and a pillar of salt, according to chapter 37 of the Quran itself. It has fields, according to Al-Bukhari. It has trees. It has grass. It has fruit. It has clay. It has loam. Now, when you stop and look at what Al-Tabari is saying and what Sahih Bukhari is saying and Al-Tirmidhi, what they're saying here, this is a place that's full of vegetation. More than that, and this is something that you brought up the last time we talked about it, it has olive trees. And that's a problematic right there. Because
And a fig tree, of course, fig and olive.
And where are they planted? Where do you find fig and olive trees?
Well, I can tell you it's not in Mecca.
That's right.
And if it was in Mecca, I'm not really so sure what happened. Why aren't they not there anymore? When in fact you go to other places like in modern day Palestine, Israel, you still find them. They've been there for hundreds of years.
Now, just to be fair, there are people that are telling us that there are now olive trees in Mecca. They have been replanted there, but that's modern days. And we're going to talk
talking
about that.
historically.
We're going to show you what we now know about modern days, because there's lots of claims being made by Muslims all the time that today, yes, you will find olive trees there. Today, yes, you will find water there.
Irrigation systems today are
There
more
you go.
sophisticated.
We're talking about at the time of Muhammad. If Muhammad existed in the 7th century, there were no olive trees. All the olive trees were way up in the Mediterranean back in the 7th century.
Right.
So you have mountains overlooking the Kaaba, according to Hisham and Al-Bukhari. So it only says that Mecca is, we now know, and you look at Mecca, you've been there many times, it's not in the valley and has none of these listed above. Certainly not in the 7th century. Maybe today there are olive trees there. Maybe today there is water there, but certainly not at the time when Muhammad would have existed. So these are problematic. This is nothing new. We've shown this before. Now we're going to get something new, because here's something new, another big problem, and that is look at all the prophets. Look at all the prophets that were buried there. This is something I hadn't realized until it was brought to my attention by some of those on our list. And they say, Jay, have you looked at all the references to the prophets? So I had my team start going back and looking and seeing where all these references are. Let's just go through some of them to show you this is problematic in and of itself. Adam and Eve, as we already said, but this is not something new. Adam and Eve were born. But here's what Reuben and Wheeler notes. According to the standard Islamic traditions, that both Adam was, not only was Adam that he died there, and as you know, once you die, you get buried within 24 hours. So you don't
That's right.
move them to another city. You get buried where you die. That's your tradition because you have to do it before sundown. So he was buried at Mount Abu Qubais near Mecca, where Eve had also been buried. That's what the traditions tell us. What about this name Abu Qubais? Well, Al-Qasai says specifically, the angel laid him in a grave, and his head was at the site of the Kaaba, and his feet stretched out. So he's buried right there next to the Kaaba, according to what traditions tell us. What's fascinating is we know where Abu Qubais is. Abu Qubais, you take a look at this map here, and I put it on the screen there, and I'm going to put a green arrow. Take a look where that is. Abu Qubais is way up over by Latakia. Up in Latakia is in Syria.
Which is in Syria, yeah.
This is way up in the Mediterranean. That's the original Abu Qubais.
Yeah.
They took that word. And remember, whenever you leave and you go to a new place, you take what you are familiar with and you take it with you. New York, the city of New York. Why is it called New York? Because it's referring to the old York. Mm-hmm. Where I live in Pennsylvania, there is a place called York. It's very close to where I live. Right. That is the name of people who have come from the old York, which is in England or Britain. And when they moved to America, they redid that word. You will find a place called Berlin, East Berlin. You'll have all these names all over America. And usually you take the name of the place you come from and then you recreate it in where you now have moved to, which is exactly what you're seeing here. The old Abu Qubais is in northern Syria, just southeast of Latakia on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, almost 1,200 miles further north from Mecca. This is a perfect example of this borrowing. So it looks like the original one was way up north. Have we said this before?
We did mention things like this in the past, but now we're unpacking it even deeper.
So just to bring that up as a side issue, let's get back then to the prophets. Did you know that Seth was also buried there? According to Uri Reuben, he talks about Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve, was also buried where Adam and Eve were buried. We already know that Adam and Eve were buried there. More than that, Ishmael. According to Al-Masudi, Reuben talks about this and says that Ishmael was one who was buried in Mecca opposite the place of the black stone. Where is the black stone?
Mecca.
You guessed it.
In the Kaaba?
It's right there on the eastern corner of the Kaaba. The sacredness attached in the Muslim tradition to the Hijr is focused on the idea that this area was the burial place of the noble dead, especially Ishmael, who is connected in Muslim legend with the history of the Kaaba. The tomb of this patriarch is found there. And he mentions this in his grave. But he goes on, according to Muhammad ibn Abd Al-Qasai, I'll let you say this because Whelan M. Thaxton refers to him, and he says that Noah and Adam were both buried in Mecca. So you can see the traditions are very clear that Adam's kiln was to the right of the Kaaba. God told the angels to carry it to Noah's house, which was then where the Mosque of the Kufa now stands. So
this is according to Al-Qasai. I mean, every Muslim knows, or at least heard the name Al-Qasai. Just like you say Al-Bukhari, Muslim, Al-Qasai is one of those big names.
So this is the standard Islamic narrative again.
Right, yes.
And we're going on everything I'm going to be introducing right now is from the standard Islamic narrative, just so you know that, and so everybody else who is watching knows that. Standard Islamic narrative are the Islamic tradition, and that refers to the Sirah of Ibn Hisham and Al-Waqidi. That refers also to the Hadith of Sahih Bukhari, Ibn Dawud, Tirmidhi, and the others. That also refers to the Tafsir and the Tariq of Al-Tabari, Zamakhshari, Suyuti, Baidawi. All of these are what we know as the standard Islamic narrative. These are the traditions, the Islamic traditions that begin in the 9th century, 833 with Ibn Hisham, continue with Al-Bukhari in 870 and 875, moving up onto Al-Tabari, 923 and later. So these are all 9th and 10th century. Let me repeat that. These are all 9th and 10th century traditions which are referring back to Adam and Eve, or referring back to Noah, and referring back to, in this case, Seth. In fact, let's continue on because there's more that come up. Let's go to the next one. Hud. Now, who is Hud? Well, he is the great-great-grandson of Noah. He's found in Surah 11. He also was buried there in Mecca, again according to Al-Qasai. That is part of the standard Islamic narrative. What about Saleh? Well, Saleh is, quoting Al-Tabari, says that Saleh, the grandfather of Hagar, who is the slave woman that bore Ishmael, was from Medina, but she died in Mecca. So she is there in, Saleh is there in in Mecca as well, according to Umar al
And we have an
Ashkar.
entire city engraved basically in rocks called Madain Saleh, the cities of Saleh.
City of Salah. So he's right there. Queen of Sheba. I didn't know this. This is a new one. Gustav Well looks and he says, according to traditions, the grave of Balkis, the Queen of Sheba, is also found there in Mecca. This is a new one to me. What is she doing way up there when she should be way down in what is today Yemen? Because that's where she is from.
Yeah.
Oh, nonetheless, she's also
The Queen
buried
of
in Mecca.
Saba. Yeah.
According to Ibn Kathir and the stories of the Prophet, Daniel not only lived there, but also died there. Daniel,
The prophet Daniel.
the old prophet Daniel. That we have the book of, you've got this great story of Daniel in the lion's den, and yet here he's not in Israel. He's way down there in Mecca.
I think we're beginning to see basically a motif here, if you wish. There is an attempt to embellish the standard Islamic narrative by infusing all of these big names to give credibility to the standard Islamic narrative, basically to the story of Islam, to Muhammad, to Islam as a religion, to the Quran. I mean, you have big names here who are only biblical names. In fact, if you ask anyone to talk about Seth, find me a story of Seth, for instance, in the Quran. You won't find it.
No, you have to go to the standard.
You have to
Islamic
go
narrative.
to the Bible to find the story about Seth. But
You're
not
talking
gonna
about that. Okay.
Yeah.
For historically, we're going to get to that.
Exactly.
But if you want to find out where he is in Islamic time, you've got to go to the standard Islamic
And these
narrative.
are writings that were written later, after the time of Muhammad, after the rise of Islam, which is easy. You and I can write story right now and add more names if we want to.
Why not? It gets even better than that. Take a look at the next slide.
Yeah.
70 to 300 prophets, according to the standard Islamic narrative, between 70 to 300 different prophets. Adi Nuruman, who has written about this extensively, he mentions that there were buried 70 prophets, including Hud and Saleh and Ishmael. The graves of Nuh and Hud and Shu'aib and Saleh and Ishmael were located between the Zamzam and the Makam. Well, the Zamzam and the Makam are within, as we now know, are within 30 meters of the Kaaba. So you can see they're all scrunched up together. The number of prophets that were buried there, some say between 77 to 99. Others say that they're around the Kaaba. So we're talking about that little area around the Kaaba. There were 300 prophets that were buried there, according to Uri Rubin, when he's looking at the standard Islamic. Wheeler also notes the same thing. As-Suyuti reports that Shu'aib, along with Hud, Saleh, Ishmael, and Noah, are buried in the sanctuary. So you see prophet after prophet after prophet. But not only are they buried there, look at what we found next. Look at the next slide. They're still alive and praying there. Al-Ashkar notes, it is narrated in the Sahih, authentic hadith, that the Prophet said the prophets are alive in their grave and they're praying. So, I mean, when they were buried, they were buried in the position of prayer.
Yeah.
So, one of the ways in which Allah honors his prophets and messengers is that the earth does not consume their bodies. No matter how long a time passes, their bodies remain preserved from decay, according to the hadith. The Sahih text indicates that the bodies of the Prophet will not decay or disappear as happens to the bodies of others, according to Umar al-Ashkar. Now, stop and think that through. If that is the case, stop and think it. You've looked at the pictures. We've shown the pictures many times of all the buildings that are being built right now.
Mm-hmm.
You have that clock tower, the fourth highest building in the world, while we're speaking. At that building, and if you're going to build large clock towers that are that high, you need to dig deep foundations. And when you dig deep foundations, what are you doing? Well, you're uncovering lots of land. And this is all around the Kaaba, where these 300 prophets are buried. When you dig foundations, don't you think they should be coming across these bodies?
Absolutely. In fact, I would challenge anyone right now with the technology that we have, just use any devices that can at least show you images of what's underneath these grounds, like the grave of Muhammad.
Wait a minute. These are alive. Remember what we just read?
Just show us what's there.
These prophets are still kneeling. They're still in a kneeling position. They're still praying. They're supposed to be alive as they're praying. Where are these prophets? Where are these bodies? Where are these bones?
Yeah.
It's, the more that you unpack the traditions, the more you look at the standard Islamic narrative. When Yasser Qadi says the standard Islamic narrative has holes in it, here's another huge hole. I'd like to know where these prophets are, between 70 to 300. Let's look at the next slide. Let's conclude this, and let's just go through each one of the list. Adam and Eve, Seth, Ishmael, Noah, Hud, Saleh, Queen of Sheba, Daniel, 70 to 300 that are prophets, all lived or died there in Mecca. This would mean that almost all of the Bible would have to be rewritten. We'd have to write everything about the Bible, and all of the stories be redirected 600 to 1,000 miles further south. Yet there is so much evidence for the biblical narrative historically, yet almost nothing for Islam. So where do Muslims go to get their authority for all of these stories? Can you see this is a real problem here?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is why we are doing this continuation of that series, In Search of a Place, because the more evidence are available out there, Dr. J and his team, and I'm thankful to also play a role in this and bringing it here in our channel. We want you, our viewers, to be aware of it immediately for one purpose, really. I mean, if you're a Muslim watching this, we're just asking you to examine the evidence. Don't get emotional. Emotions do not do anything. All we're saying is get tangible, get factual. Here are evidence. As a Muslim, by the way, you can go to Mecca, right? Non-Muslims cannot go to Mecca. You go to Mecca and you find these graves for us. In fact, be the first to do a YouTube channel and show us these images. In fact, be the first to take even devices to show us that there are actual living human beings who are praying in their graves. I mean, that will be a ground-shattering discovery, actually, for everyone. If you want to prove Islam is right, this is your opportunity to do it. So let's get real. There is none of this, nothing that exists anywhere in the earth. And that's what I mean by anywhere. So let us really focus on reality. You want to know about these prophets? Most of them, not all of them at least, Islam invented some names. You can go to the Bible. You read the history of these prophets. All of these prophets and descendancies and their genealogy and all of that throughout the Bible is very crystal clear. None of this nonsense in the Bible that you go to the grave of Abraham and he's still praying, that you go to the grave of Ishmael or Isaac or anybody else that is still praying. I mean, what benefit does it do to us anyway, even if they're still praying? I tell you one thing. The God that we worship is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the God of the living. They are alive in heaven, that's for sure, not in the body, but in the spirit, as every one of us who is in Christ will be in heaven, absent from the body, present with the Lord immediately. So we invite you to accept the Lord and get along with that and forget about these mythical stories that do not save anyone. All it causes is just people have bragging rights about things that are nonsensical, things that cannot be corroborated, things that cannot be proved, yet the facts and the truth are always found in the true book of God. That's the Bible. And that's what we invite you, as our viewers, especially if you're a Muslim, to consider examining these facts in light of what the Word of God is saying. Dr. J, thank you so much, as always. And next time, I think we're going to continue to unpack more problems that has to do with Mecca. And the more we share things with you, I assure you, you are going to be more and more basically alert to the fact that what the standard Islamic narrative shares has nothing whatsoever to do with reality. And that's what we hope for, is that you come back home to the Lord, to facts, to the truth. Amen? This is Al-Fadi. Over and out. God bless. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, Sira International, and click on the bell so that you receive notifications whenever we publish a new video or go live. I would also like to appeal to you to consider becoming a Patreon patron by clicking the link right below. By doing so, you can give towards the production of these videos. There are also other options for you where you can give to our channel. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.